Today we're going to talk about Republicans trying to foment violence in light of the bombshell Colorado Supreme Court decision keeping Trump off the ballot and the extent to which it's actually working. And I have two interviews this week. I interview Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the Republican sham impeachment effort against Joe Biden and some huge wins that this administration's racked up recently in the climate and transportation space. And I'm joined by the Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson to talk about the stunning new reporting about a recording of Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel pressuring local officials in Michigan not to certify the 2020 election, and whether there's any new legal liability for them. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. Obviously, the big news this week was the decision by the Colorado Supreme Court to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot, given that he violated the plain text of the Constitution and engaged in an insurrection. And, by the way, none of this is a surprise, right? The Constitution's been around for a minute. It's not like Democrats sprung this 150-year-old amendment on Trump out of nowhere. But still, that hasn't stopped Republicans from clutching their pearls and pretending that a court interpreting the plain text of the Constitution was somehow them engaging in election interference. Because, I don't know, apparently the courts are only allowed to enforce the laws so long as they don't disadvantage any Republicans. But part of that feigned outrage was a new push led by Fox News to try and foment violence as the result of this decision. Here's Laura Ingraham and Jesse Waters.
Now, at this point, given what we're seeing in the courts, at the DOJ, and even in state AG offices, and given Democrats' Trump is Hitler rhetoric, is it not logical, at least to consider, maybe even to assume, that some on the left are hoping to spark some type of civil unrest here, which would be followed, of course, by a mass crackdown on civil liberties, or the declaration of maybe a nationwide emergency? All as a way, a pretextual way, to usher in, I don't know, nationwide mail-in voting.
It feels like the left wants violence because that's where this is going. We're being baited, so their actions are justified. That's how it feels. The more the left overplays their hand, the scarier this gets.
So let's get this straight. By quite literally interpreting the plain text of the Constitution, the GOP has decided that Democrats are trying to bait Republicans into reacting violently so that, in turn, that would give Democratic leaders a rationale to crack down on them. I'm sorry, but what? Like, these people are so desperate for violence that they're creating excuses for themselves in advance. Like, I don't know, here's an idea. Maybe be a fucking adult and don't engage in violence because a court found that a guy who engaged in an insurrection was barred from being on the ballot because there's quite literally a provision barring people who've engaged in insurrection from appearing on the ballot. Of course, be an adult is falling on deaf ears because we are already seeing exactly the violence that these Fox hosts are giving themselves cover for. According to Advanced Democracy, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that conducts public interest research, there has been significant violent rhetoric against the Colorado Supreme Court justices and Democrats, much of which was in direct response to Trump's post about the ruling on Truth Social. They found that some social media users posted justices' email addresses, phone numbers, and office building addresses. One user wrote, "What do you call 7 justices from the Colorado Supreme Court at the bottom of the ocean? A good start." And that one is tame relative to the other posts that showed up, which I won't repeat, but which are about as brazen and dangerous and chilling as you can possibly imagine. I will include the link to the NBC article in the post description of this video if you do want to read more. But let's be clear, the pattern of violence on the right isn't a bug, it's a feature. This is a deliberate strategy employed by Republicans who know that the law isn't on their side and who know that the majority of Americans aren't on their side. And so they figure that their only shot at getting what they want is by using violence to take it. We saw that play out with far-right militias in the states in the lead up to the 2020 election, which of course was intended to intimidate voters and election officials. And to a much larger degree, we saw it play out on January 6th, where Trump incited his supporters to descend upon the Capitol, where they threatened to kill Democratic leaders and hang Mike Pence if those people didn't capitulate to their demands. More recently, judges have been enduring a barrage of threats for ruling against Trump in his various prosecutions across the country. Judge Wallace, the lower court judge who initially found that Trump engaged in insurrection but ruled that he could stay on the ballot, which of course was later reversed by the Colorado Supreme Court, wrote as part of a protective order, quote, "I 100% understand everybody's concerns for the parties, the lawyers, and frankly myself and my staff based on what we've seen in other cases." So to suggest that the violence isn't having an impact when even judges are acknowledging it from the bench is ignoring the obvious reality. And Trump and his supporters and his mouthpieces in the media obviously know that, which is why they're trying to foment it whenever they can. But here's the thing. This is precisely why it is so important to shut it down quickly and decisively. Like, did it take way too long in the January 6th cases? Absolutely. But at the same time, now over 1,000 people have been charged. And guess what? When Trump tried to foment another violent mob in New York after his indictment there, no one showed. Because even the loyalists understand that their fealty to Trump probably isn't worth losing their freedom over. And granted, while he doesn't give a shit if they rot in prison, they probably do. So make an example out of these people who both incite people to violence and who commit the violence themselves. Because if it doesn't happen now, then we are only assured to see more violence in the future. Here's a preview of my interviews with Pete Buttigieg and Jocelyn Benson. How worried were you when you found out that Joe Biden committed the high crime of helping his son pay for a truck as a private citizen?
You know, it really is, it just defies logic. They've been at this for more than a year. They can't even decide what the supposed charges are. It's clearly a fishing expedition, but the thing that's really worrisome is there's a real opportunity cost to this. This is the same United States Congress that we urgently need to do things like reauthorize our FAA bill that's helping us keep air traffic controllers on the job. We need them to pass a Railway Safety Act that is going to make sure that something like what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, never happen again. We need them for a budget, just the absolute basics. And the fact that they have time for this and they don't have time for all of that calls into question what the priorities are for House Republicans.
They're making the argument themselves that the point of this Republican House conference majority is the dysfunction in and of itself. But clearly, the whole point of this effort here is to offer up the optics of corruption as far as Joe Biden is concerned. What's your message to Republicans out there, especially those who consume right-wing media, about the disinformation that they're being fed by these folks who are desperate to hurt Biden politically?
The bottom line is to look at the fact that this has not produced anything real. They are openly admitting that they are launching an investigation for the purpose of finding something that would justify an investigation, which they can't. And in the meantime, they are wasting time and money that is very much needed for Congress to deal with things that actually have to get done. And if you are a conservative, if you are a religious Fox News viewer, you are going to be hurt just as much as any Democrat or independent sitting at home watching this play out. You too will suffer if Congress can't even pass a budget or give us the resources to train the air traffic controllers who keep the system running or do any of the other things that we need Congress to do at a moment when there is enormous conflict and instability and pain in the Middle East, at a moment when there is democracy on the line in Ukraine. And at a moment when right here at home, we need to be investing more, not less, in keeping this country running. It hurts all of us when they waste time and money on these kinds of political partisan adventures.
Now, onto the major report from the Detroit News that Trump and RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel were caught on a recording pressuring Wayne County officials not to sign the certification of the 2020 presidential election. So, first of all, Ronna had said during the call, if you can go home tonight, do not sign it. We will get you attorneys. So, and this was alluded to in the article, but if she offered something of value, in this case, legal protection, in exchange for these canvassers not doing their jobs and helping the Trump campaign, does that not create legal exposure for McDaniel for potentially engaging in some type of bribery?
Sure, potentially. I mean, look, there's no shortage of investigations happening right now at the state and federal level into everything that unfolded in the post-election time of 2020. So I imagine this, or I would anticipate that this new revelation, and again, we were well aware that President Trump at the time and his team were actively seeking to interfere with the Wayne County certification vote. The fact that there was a recording of that interference was unknown to me until the Detroit News broke the story. And I don't know of those investigating all of these activities who has what. And my job is to simply continue cooperating with all of the relevant investigations into looking at all of the potential crimes that were committed. And perhaps this latest revelation will be added to those investigations. We certainly know they're all ongoing.
What steps are being taken, if any, to prevent something like this from happening in the future in Michigan?
Well, I think first, since 2020, we worked to change the law to clarify the clearly ministerial role that our local canvassers and the statewide Board of Canvassers has for every election. It's important to remember that these folks are appointed by the political parties, and especially given the fact that Michigan's Republican Party is now chaired by a very open election denier who still has not only has she not acknowledged the true results of the 2020 election in which Biden won Michigan, she hasn't even acknowledged the fact that she lost the Secretary of State race in 2022 by 14 points. Yeah. So I'm not holding my breath for, revelation that somehow the party will start, looking at truth and facts to rule the day, and maybe appointing people to these canvassing boards that similarly will act in furtherance of conspiracy theories as opposed to the law. So on all of those fronts, we have strengthened our legal protections in Michigan so that we can seek court orders when the law is violated. But that doesn't necessarily impact or change or in many cases, deter people from trying to break the law to begin with. So we're preparing for that as well by making sure people know what the law is and continuing to be transparent in affirming our election results and making sure we all know that there are people in these positions who may try again to gum up the certification process to further a political agenda. We're not going to let them win in the short or long term. And ultimately in 2020, it was people showing up to these certification hearings, speaking the truth and cogently requesting and demanding that their votes count that ensured indeed the vote and the election would rule the day.
And of course, to watch the full interviews with Pete Buttigieg and Jocelyn Benson, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also listen to the audio version of this episode by clicking that link on the screen, and to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.